All right, guys, it's time to do a market update for the real estate markets for the cities outside of Edmonton for a change. So that's going to include cities like Leduc, Spruce Grove, St. Albert, Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park, and Beaumont. So if you're looking at any of those 6 cities outside of Edmonton, you're going to want to tune into this video because I'm going to be looking at the real estate market using the most recent statistics available from the Realtors Association of Edmonton. So that's going to be using the month of June, looking at the stats for the whole month. And for each of those markets, we're going to first start look at the market as a whole, everything, all the residential homes and condos that sold, average prices, how the market balance is, whether it's a buyer's market, a seller's market, or a balanced market. Then we're going to look at the same thing, but just for the single family home market, and then finally for the condo market. And if you're only interested in learning about some of these cities, but not all of them, if you look along the bottom of this video on YouTube, you can click to jump to the cities that you're interested in. But I will remind you that you can also get copies of each one of these reports. If you look in the description, I've got a link for each city, and you can get a PDF copy of the reports that we'll be looking at. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video, and we're going to start with Leduc. For the total residential, that's the whole market of Leduc, the average price in June was $385,974, which is actually up 4.84% from May and up 5.66% from June of 2021. So if you look at the history here, you can see that we had some gains in February and March, then we lost a little bit in April and May, and now we're up again in June. You're going to see a lot of that up and down for most of these suburban city markets, just because there's not a whole lot of sales activity. So if you've got expensive properties selling or really cheap properties selling, that's really going to start to mess with your average prices. So don't get too caught up on those. If you are interested in getting a lot more specific pricing information for specific neighborhoods or types of properties and what's a fair market price, I'd recommend reaching out to me at 780-819-5508. You can either text me or call me. I am a licensed realtor with YEG Pro Realty here in Edmonton, so I service Edmonton and all the surrounding communities. And you can also email me at trevor@trevortardif.com or go to booktrevornow.com. Select the time on my calendar and I will call you. So let's keep going. Now, looking at active and sold listings, at the end of the month, there was 153 active listings and there had been 91 sales. So the number of active listings is up 17.69% from last month, but down just over 26% from June of last year. Whereas the sales are still up 8.33% from last month, but down 7.14% from June. Now, this is something that I'm seeing as a pattern with most of these cities outside of Edmonton, is they're performing a little bit differently than Edmonton, with some of them still having sales that are actually up compared to last month, which is not the case in Edmonton if you watch my Edmonton market update video. If not, if you click up here over to the right, there's a link to go watch the Edmonton real estate market update video. Now let's take a look at what's been happening with the balance of active and sold listings over the last 13 months. You can see last June we had 207 active listings and 98 sales, whereas this month we had 153 active listings and 91 sales. So the sales are down like a little bit from last year, but we still have reduced inventory compared to last year. But the inventory is starting to ramp up a little bit. If you look, starting in January this year, we only had 96 listings and 48 sales. Then we jumped down to 78 listings when we had 82 sales. So those 3 months, February, March, and April, we were actually having more sales on a monthly basis than what we had for inventory at the end of the month, which basically shows you that things were really tight. It was going pretty insane in those months. And that balance has really started to ease off a little bit as the inventory creeped up a bit. So we went from having a low of like 73 listings in March, then it jumped up a little bit, then it jumped up more at 130, and now we're at 153. So we are starting to see that inventory growing a little bit in the Leduc market, which takes some of that stress out of the market for buyers. And it's still adjusting pretty rapidly, but not as rapidly as what we saw happening in Edmonton, or it seems like it's just a little bit behind Edmonton, so it might take a little bit longer to see what we're seeing in Edmonton in these markets outside of it. So with those sales numbers, like the number of actives and sales, that puts us at a listing absorption rate of 59%, which is still technically a seller's market for the market as a whole, but not nearly as insane as what we saw before. Here you can see the balance that we were over 100% for February, March, and April. Then it dropped down to 64% in May, and now we're at 59%. So if that continues, it probably will end up being a balanced market in Leduc in the near future. especially as we get into the fall and winter months for sure. We'll definitely be in a balanced or perhaps a buyer's market by then. The average days on market, we were sitting at 25 days on average for June, which is going up a little bit. It was 20 in May, but last June it was actually 38. So it's still performing better than it did last year in terms of how long it takes stuff to sell. Now, if we hop over and look at the single family home market in Leduc, just the single family home market, the average price was $406,413, which is down 0.29% from last month, but up 5.29% from last year. Again, I wouldn't put too much stock in this. You are going to see a little bit of increases and decreases, and it'll fluctuate quite a bit. It does look like it's closely or relatively closely to following Edmonton, where we had a lot of the gains in February and March. Now, if we look at the actives and sales, we had 130 active single-family home listings at the end of June and 80 sales. The number of active listings is up 21.5% from last month and down 21.69% from last year. But the sales are up 21.21% as well, and down 8.05% from last year. So we're still seeing a bit of a shift in the balance of the market. Very similar to what we saw for the market as a whole, since most of it is a single family home market in Leduc. But this is just your 13-month history showing that May and June had a relatively similar balance of the market, even though we had increased sales in June compared to May. Now, if we look at the absorption rate, it's sitting at 61.54%, which is still seller's market territory, although if that continues to shift, it could end up being balanced. So I wouldn't necessarily be expecting there to be upward pressure on prices for single family homes in Leduc, especially with the shifts that we're seeing in the market. There is a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of buyers kind of waiting on the sidelines, wondering if they should buy now or if they should wait a little while to see how things shake out in the market. So I wouldn't be overconfident if you're a seller. Make sure you price it right so that you can get a quick, fair sale at a good price. Now, if we look at the average days on market for single family homes, it was sitting at 24 days compared to 19 days last month and 34 days last year. So things are taking a little bit longer to sell than they did last month. And if we just take a really quick look at condos, the average price for condos that sold in June was $237,331. You can see that the condo market is a very small part of the market, with only 23 active listings in Leduc at the end of the month and 11 sales. You can see that the balance of the market is changing a little bit. The number of active listings is down significantly from last year, down 43.9% from last year when we had 41 active listings, but it's the same as it was last month. And the number of sales is down 38.89% from last month, and no change from last year with 11 sales as well. So it's still seeing a bit of a shift there, but it's so volatile just based on how small that market is. Sitting at a 47% listing absorption rate, that puts you in balanced market territory for condominiums in Leduc. It's a lot different than Edmonton. In Edmonton, for the condos, there's a lot of them and not a ton of them are selling, so it's definitely a buyer's market. Whereas if you look at the condo market here in Leduc, just based on the balance, it is a lot more balanced. And it was a seller's market technically late in May last month. So a little bit different there. I still wouldn't get overly optimistic on your pricing for condos. You're still gonna have to price it right, but you are in a better situation than if your condo had been in Edmonton instead. Now, if you look at the average days on market for condos, it's sitting at 32 days versus 27 days last month and 65 days last year. So June was well, the ones that sold in June last year definitely took their time. Okay, so that finishes it up for Leduc. Now we're going to jump into Spruce Grove. So let's look at the market as a whole in Spruce Grove. The average price in Spruce Grove in June was $421,139, which is up 7.6% from last month and up 4.58% from last year. Now, if we go and look at the number of actives and solds, there was 195 active listings at the end of the month and 76 sales. So the number of active listings is up 27.45% from last month, but down 5.34% from June of last year, whereas the sales are up or down actually 25.49% from last month and down 28.3% from last year. So we're seeing a little bit more dramatic of a shift in the market of Spruce Grove compared to Leduc. You can see that just like Leduc, it had really strong February, March, and April, but there was still a little bit, except for in March, there was still more actual inventory than there was sales that month, but that's really started to pull back. Again, the inventory levels have increased, but we are seeing a relatively steep decline in sales volume. Again, we're only talking about like 20 to 25 less homes that sold each month, because we went from 121 to 102, going from April to May. And then from May to June, we went from 102 to 76. So each time we kind of lost 25-ish sales, or around 20. From a percentage change, it's a pretty big change. But if you're actually just looking at the numbers, it's not a ton, just because it's a smaller market. But I would definitely keep an eye on that, because it does seem to be shifting a little bit faster. This one actually puts it into a balanced market with a 38% listing absorption rate as a whole, which is quite a bit different than Leduc. So your odds of selling are going down compared to May of last month and compared to June of last year. So average days on market was 24 days compared to 26 last month and 35 days last year. It's kind of funny when you get into these smaller markets, even though we're seeing other stuff that makes it look like the balance of the market is changing. We had less sales. The ones that did sell sold in less time compared to the ones that sold last month. Now, if we go and look at the single family home market in Spruce Grove, the average price was $434,226, which was up 4.47% from last month and up 4.69% from June of last year. And if we go and look at the actives and solds for single family homes, we had 144 active listings at the end of the month and 68 sales. Same story here with the market balance, really seeing it change from February, March, April, and then starting to really shift and take a lot of the stress out of the market in May and June. It's still a healthy market, sitting at a 47% listing absorption rate, which does put you at the upper end of a balanced market. And that's just showing you the percentages here. It's gonna look the same as the actives and solds, just another way of looking at it. And the average days on market was sitting at 21 days on average versus 20 days last month and 35 days last year. Well, now we'll just take a quick look at the Spruce Grove condo market with an average price of $309,906, which was up 47.98% from May and up 33.74% of June of last year. This is just a prime example of how you can't trust the average price for small markets like this, because obviously there was some more expensive condos that sold recently that made it have a huge jump in the average price. And maybe May, they had a bunch of cheap condos that sold, because we were down technically 22.23% in May. So wouldn't give the average price much stock. You can see that there's much different story here for the condo market with 51 actives and 8 sales. This looks a lot more like the Edmonton condo market compared to the Leduc condo market, where it's certainly a buyer's market. Active listings are up a little bit. We had 47 last month, now we got 51, and the sales dropped from 12 to 8, whereas our peak for the year was at 18 in April. So definitely seeing some reduced sales, and the inventory is staying about the same. And the average days on market for condos in Spruce Grove was 44 days compared to 67 days last month and 48 days last year. So that wraps it up for Spruce Grove. If you're interested in buying or selling in Spruce Grove, make sure to reach out to me at 780-819-5508. Either text me or call me at that number, or go to booktrevornow.com, select a time on my calendar, and we'll set up a free consultation call for you. Okay, let's jump into the St. Albert real estate market. Looking at the housing market in St. Albert, the total residential average price was $488,138, which was up 1.17% from May and up 7.01% from June of last year. And now if we look at the number of active and sold listings, there was 243 active listings at the end of the month in St. Albert, and there had been 137 sales throughout the month of June. So the number of active listings is up 22.73% from last month, but still down 30.37% from June of last year. So that shows you that we're still dealing with reduced inventory in St. Albert. And the number of sales sitting at 137 last month was down 24.31% from May and down 13.29% from June. So if we look at the 13-month history here, again, it's gonna look pretty familiar how things got pretty tight in February, March, April, and even May in St. Albert, and then it really started to pull back in June. So whereas a lot of the other markets started to see a clear shift in May, St. Albert still had quite a strong May with more sales than they did the month before. But now in June, we saw a shift in the market where the inventory was actually able to jump up to 243, but we saw a little bit of a drop, about 40 sales in June. So that starts to take some of the stress out of the St. Albert real estate market, but it's still sitting at a 56% listing absorption rate, which is still seller's market territory, but it is easing off now, so I wouldn't expect prices to go up in the short term. The average days on market was sitting at 20 days compared to 21 days last month and 35 days last year. So it's still a pretty hot market in St. Albert. If we look at the single family home market, the average price for single family detached homes in St. Albert was $560,814, which is up 2.76% from last month and up 11.84% from June of last year. Okay, now if we only look at the actives and solds for single family home market, there was 149 active listings at the end of the month and 106 sales. So the number of active listings is up 21.14% from last month and down 30.37% from last year. And the sales are down 23.74% from last month and down 12.4% from last year. So same sort of thing where this is the first time we've actually seen things ease off in St. Albert for about 4 or 5 months with the inventory creeping up a little bit for single family homes and the sales volume dropping. So that gives you a little bit more breathing room, but we're still sitting at a 71.14% listing absorption rate. So that's actually still pretty hot. So if you're looking to buy a detached home in St. Albert, it's still pretty strong seller's market just looking at it as a whole. Obviously, we saw a big shift in this last month, and if that continues, it could get more balanced, but it's definitely a tighter market here. Average days on market sitting at 18, that's the same as it was last month, and last year was sitting at 27, so still a pretty robust market. Gonna be hard for buyers out there in St. Albert. Now let's look at the condo market. The average price was $239,632. Which was down, 12.25% from last month and down 22.24% from last year. Those are almost useless to look at in this case, and I'll show you why. Actually, there's more condos here than there are in some of the other small markets, but it still can be very easily skewed by low priced condos versus high priced condos. There was 94 active listings in June and 31 sales. We did see that same shift we saw in the market overall in St. Albert in the month of June, seeing 31 sales and 94 active listings, which put the condo market at 32% listing absorption rate, which is kind of on the cusp between a weak buyer's market and the low end of a balanced market. So it's still technically a balanced market, but if it drops more, it could go into a buyer's market for condos in St. Albert. Average days on market was sitting at 30 days, which is the same as last month versus 61 days last year. And that's it for St. Albert. Next, we're gonna look at Fort Saskatchewan. The market as a whole, the average price was $422,690, which was up 1.07% from last month and up 13.81% from last year. Now looking at actives and solds, there was 153 active listings and 61 sales. So the number of active listings is up just over 33% from last month and down 25.73% from last year. Now the number of actual sold listings was sitting at 61, which was down 19.74% from last month and down 27.38% from June of last year. So a little bit of a similar scenario of what we were seeing in Leduc and Spruce Grove. Again, things started pulling back as early as April in Fort Saskatchewan. That's where we got some breathing room in the market. We had a few more sales in May, but we made up for it with a bit more inventory. And then we had a decent jump in the number of active listings, but the sales volume dropped a fair amount in June. So that really changed the balance of the market, putting us at 39.87%, which is kind of right in the middle of a balanced market. So it shouldn't be too hard for buyers or sellers right now. Last month we were in a seller's market, so we jumped from a seller's market to a balanced market just in 1 month, and we were in a super strong seller's market back in March and February. So average days on market sitting at 30 days compared to 24 days last month and 34 days last year. So we are seeing a shift in that market as well. If we go and look at the single family home portion of Fort Saskatchewan, the average price was $470,887, which was up 6.28% from last month and up 20.7% from last year. And if we look at the actual actives and solds, we had 113 active listings and 48 sales. So the actives are up 41.25% from last month and down still 20.98% from June of last year. And the solds are down 28.36% from last month and down 36.84% from last year. So from a percentage basis, we're seeing a pretty significant drop in the sales volume in Fort Saskatchewan here. So it's a pretty big change in the market just in a couple months. And you can see that we're still pretty similar to where we were for most of last year. So it's nothing to get freaked out about. It's still a balanced market sitting at an absorption rate of 42.48%, but it is shifting. So we are seeing a shift in the market. Average days on market was sitting at 30 compared to 24 last month and 32 last year. Now, if we look at the condo market in Fort Saskatchewan, the average price was $244,730, which is up 4.88% from last month and up 26.6% from last year. Wouldn't give that much weight because there's only 40 active listings and 13 sales in the month. So each one of those sales is going to have a pretty big impact on your average prices. Now, the active listings for condos are up 14.29% from last month, but down 36.51% from last year. And the sales are up actually 44.44% from last month and up 62.5% of last year. Now, that sounds amazing, but you can see that, okay, we went from 9 sales to 13 sales, woo. And last year we had 8 sales. Going from 8 to 13 gives you a 62% increase in sales volume, but there's just so few of them that every extra sale or every extra listing starts to make a big difference on the percentages. Now, the absorption rate was sitting at 32.5%, which is pretty balanced. The average days on market was 31 versus 25 last month and 48 last year. So that's it for Fort Saskatchewan. If you're looking at buying or selling in Fort Saskatchewan, make sure to book a free strategy call with me. You can go to booktrevornow.com, select the time on my calendar, and then I will call you. Now we're going to take a look at Sherwood Park, the market as a whole. The average price was $445,373, which is down 6.3% from last month and up 2.42% from last year. Number of active listings was sitting at 162 at the end of the month, and the number of solds was 133. Our active listings are up 2.53% from last month, but down 39.55% from last year. And the number of sales are down 14.74% from last month and down 15.82% from last year. So again, the Sherwood Park market is still very robust. This is the first month we're really seeing much breathing room being added to the market. We got 4 more listings than we did last month by month end, but we did see the sales volume drop, like I said, about 15% down to 133, but it's still pretty tight. This has been one of the tightest markets over the last year, even during the fall months when things tend to ease up a little bit, but it's been tight all year, basically. Sitting at an 82.1% listing absorption rate. Still technically a strong seller's market. Until this shifts more, I don't see prices dropping in Sherwood Park. They could actually still go up in some cases. The average days on market was sitting at 24, and it was 21 last month, and 29 days in June of last year. Now, if we look just at the single family home market in Sherwood Park, the average price was $510,482, which is down 0.88% from last month, but up 9.82% from last year. Definitely one of the stronger markets around Edmonton. You can see the number of active single family homes was 97 at the end of the month, and there had been 94 sales, so it's pretty much neck and neck. And this shows you how tight the single family home market is in Sherwood Park. The number of active listings are up 19.75% from last month, but down still 33% from June of last year. Even though the sales are down 25.4% from last month and down 28.24% from last year, the number of sales and active listings are neck and neck, and it's been like that for basically the last 13 months. You can see there was a little bit of breathing room in July and September and October, and then it just got closed right up, and now we could just see like an inch of breathing room there. So sitting at an absorption rate of 96.91%, still a super strong seller's market. And even though it's easing up a little bit, that's still a situation that does put upward pressure on prices. And that's part of the reason we've seen Sherwood Park outperforming average price gains than a lot of the other areas. Average days on market sitting at 18 compared to 17 last month and 24 days last year. Condo market is where you're going to see a little bit more slack. Average price sitting at $288,444, and the number of active listings was sitting at 65 versus 39 sales. Still very robust, but not nearly as tight as the single family home market. And we actually saw a retreat in the number of active listings, losing 15.58% of active inventory compared to last month, and down 47.15% from last year. Whereas the sales are up 30% from last month and up 44.44% from last year. So we actually lost some inventory and had a bit more sales in June compared to May. Still, like, it's probably one of the most robust condo markets in Edmonton and surrounding areas that we'll come across, sitting at a listing absorption rate of 60%, which is technically seller's market territory. So you don't see that very often for condos around here. It did ease up a little bit in April and May, but it shot back up in June. Average days on market was sitting at 39 days compared to 37 days last month and 50 days last year. This market's definitely been shifting up and down a little bit, but it is performing quite well as compared to other condo markets, and also compared to where it was at last year. So maybe some people are getting pushed out of the single family home market in Sherwood Park and opting to buy a condo instead if they really want to be there. Okay, and last but not least, we're going to look at the Beaumont real estate market. But again, I just want to remind you guys that there's links to all these reports in the description below. And if you're looking for some advice and guidance on buying or selling a home in the Edmonton and surrounding communities, make sure to reach out to me. You can reach me at 780-819-5508. Either text me or call me, or email me at trevor@trevortardif.com, or go to booktrevornow.com, select the time on my calendar, and I'll call you. So let's get into the Beaumont report. The average price in June was $480,680, which is technically down 5.68% from May and down 3.94% from June of last year. If we look at the actives and solds, there was 110 active listings at the end of the month and 46 sales. So the number of active listings are up 23.6% from last month, and still up a little bit from last year, up 2.8% from last year. Whereas the number of sales are down 34.29% from last month and down 13.21% from last year. So similar shift in this market. It was really tight in February and March, then it eased back earlier than some other markets in April, but then came back a little bit in May. And then we were able to actually add a significant amount of inventory while also seeing the number of sales drop, and that's probably what allowed the inventory to creep up a little bit there. That brought us to an absorption rate of 41.82% in Beaumont, which is a balanced market versus the seller's market we had last month. We had 5 months of seller's market starting in January, as early as January in Beaumont, which was interesting. Usually most of the other markets it hit in February, but you could tell things were getting tight near the end of January. So things have eased up quite a bit in the market. Now it's technically balanced, but it's a small market, so that's something that could change very easily if a bunch of people, if even just 10 extra people decide to buy and 10 people decide not to sell, that'll even shift the balance of the market. So average days on market was 26 days compared to 27 days last month and 36 days last year. If we just look at the single family home market, the average price was $498,053, which is down 4.88% from last month and down 4.64% from last year. Number of active listings was 103 with 43 sales. The active listings are up 19.77% from last month and up 13.19% from last year, whereas the sales are down 34.85% from last month and down 10.42% from last year. So again, we're seeing basically the same shift here with the single family home market. Most of it is single family homes. The listing absorption rate went down to 41.75%, which is a balanced market, like I said. Average days on market for single family homes was 25 days versus 27 days last month and 31 days last year. Now we'll just take a quick look at the condo market. Average price in Beaumont condo market was $231,666, which you can see is a big drop of 17.11% from last month, but doesn't really mean anything, and down over 20% from last year. And that's because this market has hardly any condos whatsoever, probably the least out of all of the cities outside of Edmonton we've looked at, with 7 active listings at the end of the month and 3 sales. So this is all over the map. It's almost funny to look at the absorption rate. It's at 42%, which is technically balanced, but if you have 1 extra sale or 1 less listing, it's gonna move that again. So average days on market for the ones that did sell last month was 37 compared to 16 in May and 81 in June. So all over the map, just because the market's so small, the stats get really screwy. That's it. You can get a copy of these reports in the link below. Let me know what you think. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, so make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. If you'd like to watch more market update videos, you can click over here to watch more videos, or you can click over here to subscribe. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.